Hello and welcome to the 2022 WriteHive Guest of Honor interview with Kalynn Bayron. Kalynn is the best-selling author of the young adult fantasy novels Cinderella's Dead and This Poison Heart. She's a classically trained vocalist, and when she's not writing, you can find her listening to Ella Fitzgerald on loop, attending the theater, watching scary movies, and spending time with her kids. She currently lives in Ithaca, New York with her family. Kalynn, thank you for joining us today. We love to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I have a few questions here I'd like to get through with you if we could get started on that. And the first one is, what inspired you to start writing?
Yeah, so I think that I've always been a storyteller. I didn't really know what kind of medium that would go into. I loved books and reading and stories, fairy tales as a kid. Um, and I think that ultimately it was just kind of something that I couldn't let go of. I kept thinking about it. I wrote a novel when I was 19, when I was and it was a mess, but it kind of let me know that this was something that I could do, that I could start something and finish it. And then I came back to writing later on because life kind of had other plans in the meantime. But I think ultimately I became a writer because I'm a reader first. I love a good story. I read pretty widely. And so I'm just always finding inspiration in stories. And, that to me, that felt like something I wanted to do. I went to college for music. And so I thought maybe at some point I would go into theater writing, playwriting, something like that. I still might, but my kind of journey, my path to becoming a children's book author really was just born out of this kind of love of reading coupled with a lack of representation in the fiction that I was reading. So that's kind of what it was. That's where it started for me.
Awesome. That's great. So can you dive into that, what you just mentioned, your start in the writing journey, and walk us through that as well?
Yeah, so like I said, I wrote a novel when I was 19, but it was the very first time that I had attempted something like that. I had written a lot of poems, a lot of kind of short fiction. And that first attempt at a novel was a mess. But like I said, the lesson learned there for me was just that I could finish something like that. And then when I was in my 30s, I came back to writing. And having my own children, and kind of they're also avid readers, and reading the things that they were into. I felt like I wasn't seeing the kind of representation that I really wanted to see. So when I sat down to write Cinderella is Dead, and Cinderella is Dead I wrote 3 other novels before I wrote Cinderella is Dead. And those novels were also just kind of practice, kind of helping me find my own voice, and kind of being able to tell the story that I wanted to tell didn't happen until I wrote Cinderella is Dead. When I sat down to write that book, I was like, I need to write a story. I need to write the story that I want to tell. I don't want to be like anybody else. I just want to write the story my way, tell it the way I need to tell it. And so that's kind of how that came about. But again, ultimately, it really is about wanting to write a story that really speaks to me, or would have spoken to that kind of younger version of myself, who just really wanted to see kind of queer Black girls at the center of these kind of fantastical stories.
And amazing stories as well. Cinderella's Dead, I loved it. And that, I agree what you mentioned about finding representation. I mean, seeing a person of color on the cover of a fairy tale was amazing. So thank you for bringing that into the world. So once you finished Cinderella is Dead, did you start querying and looking for agents, or what was your process?
Yeah, so I wrote Cinderella is Dead in 2016, the first 8 or 9 months of 2016, And when I was done with it, when I felt like it was as polished as it could be, I took it to query. And that is, being in the query trenches is a tough thing. It is rejection almost, like 90% of the time, maybe even more than that. It's just a lot of rejection, a lot of doubt kind of creeps in. But I got an agent, my agent Jamie. I found her in, I think it was February of 2017. So after months and months of just querying, we kind of linked up. And after I got my agent, we went through another round of revisions with Cinderella. We really needed to kind of tighten up the story and make some changes. I think sometimes there's this perception that once you get a literary agent and you've got your manuscript, you're like good to go. But it wasn't quite like that. We did a lot of revising. And when we were finally ready to go on submission, again, it was another few rounds of rejections and suggestions and edits before we got a bite from Bloomsbury Children's. And that's ultimately who ended up buying Cinderella's Dead. But that journey is so, that like if you that journey could break you if you let it. It can be really challenging to face that kind of rejection. But it's part of the process. Everybody who is traditionally published goes through that. So yeah, that's kind of the journey in a nutshell.
Thank you. Awesome. So can you talk us through what is your writing process? If you decide like today's a writing day, what is your process?
Yeah, I am pretty flexible with my writing time. I used to have a very rigid schedule, but COVID kind of forced me to adapt because my kids were in doing virtual. And I have 4 kids, so everybody was in the house at the same time, and I didn't have this block of time when everyone was kind of at school where I could focus. So I had to adapt. So for me, a writing day really just looks like an opportunity. I have an opportunity to put down, 100 words, 250 words, 500 words, and it could be in spurts throughout the day, or it could be one chunk of time. It just really depends on what I'm doing, what I have going on that day. I try to write as often as possible. I don't write every day. There's a lot of writing advice out there. You have to write every day. You have to have a schedule. You have to take all writing advice with a grain of salt. You have to do what works for you. And for me, it's just about kind of getting the words in whenever I can, because I have a busy life. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's really about being flexible. Sometimes I write on my phone, my laptop, my desktop, wherever, I can kind of fit that time in. And I use like a word tracker. It's called Pacemaker. It's really great tool that I love to use. I can set goals, and when I have those writing goals set and in front of me, it's a lot easier to kind of stick to those goals. But they're still very loose. It's nothing too rigid. But it really is about just putting the words down, and not kind of waiting to be inspired or waiting for, the muse. It's more just about putting your butt in the chair and doing the work.
Awesome. Thank you. So can you tell us what appeals to you most about the genre that you write in?
So I love fantasy. That is kind of what I love, stories with a kind of elements of magic and magic systems. And fantasy, whether it's historical fantasy or contemporary fantasy, I feel like is a really great space to explore, societal issues and societal expectations. And I've written, books that are historical fantasy and then books that are contemporary fantasy. And I just love that fantasy element. I also write a lot of scary stories. And that's also really fun for me. I love a scary story. I love a good horror novel. Um, so genre for me is, I never want to be constrained by the kind of by the genre itself. I want to be able to mix and match, because I find those stories that pull in elements of fantasy and horror for me are the most compelling. I love those types of stories, and those are the types of stories I try to write. So so genre is great, because there you have to have a spot on the shelf. You have to know where your book is going to go, but I don't want to be constrained in my writing by those kind of rules, those hard and fast genre rules. But I love fantasy. I love horror. So for me, those are the two things that I'm drawn to the most. And it's just because there are those kind of fantastical elements that feel kind of outside of our kind of everyday existence. So that's the appeal for me.
Hmm. It is funny that you say that, because in Cinderella is Dead, you can almost feel Prince Charming like breathing on the back of her neck as she's running. Like that tension is definitely there. So it makes
Yeah.
sense that you say that.
Yeah.
So what are your favorite tropes to read or write?
Oh, I love a found family. I think for me, there is, especially, I think when you're part of a marginalized community, I think that you can relate to those kind of found family trope. I love having my characters find people who maybe they're not related to, or people who aren't in their immediate circle, that they can identify with, and that they can create these really strong bonds with. I really enjoy found family. And I think in everything that I write, there's these kinds of elements of finding your community, and finding where you fit in, and finding people who are there to support you. Um, that's such a huge thing for all of us as people, as individuals. And so to be able to have my characters feel those same things and find that same community is really appealing for me. So I think found family is my favorite, but also, like, depending on what I'm writing, I write children's fiction, but I love to read. I love romance. And so in romance, there's this like only one bed, and only, what are we going to do? And that's fun to read for me.
Awesome. I love that too. Are there elements of yourself that you've written into your main characters intentionally or not?
Um, yes. So with Cinderella is Dead, I didn't, because it's more historical, there was more of me in these in the personalities, versus kind of like the way that my characters are navigating the world in that story. I think that Amina is I was able to put a little bit of my personality there. She kind of has a slick mouth, and she kind of is over everybody else's attitudes, and she doesn't, I feel like there's a little bit of me there. But I think I had another opportunity with my second novel, which was This Poison Heart, which is a contemporary fantasy, to put more of myself into those characters. Briseis is my main character, but her mom and Mo, I put a lot of myself into the character of Mom, just because I'm a mom, and I have these experiences that I can kind of throw in there, that feel very relatable and very real to me. So I think in everything that I write, there's a little bit of myself in the main characters. But it doesn't have to be that way. But for me, it's kind of ended up, I've kind of ended up doing that.
Awesome. So WriteHive's tagline is "Writing the Future We Need." What does that look like for you in your work?
Yeah, we need to kind of paraphrase Dr. Radine Sims Bishop, who wrote a landmark piece, Mirrors, Windows, and Sliding Glass Doors. I think for me, the future is creating more mirrors, creating more windows, just trying to put stories out there that encompass the myriad ways in which we exist. The queer community, the Black community, we are not a monolith. There are so many different ways in which we exist. And I think sometimes publishing has a tendency to focus a lot on pain, on trauma, on suffering when it comes to marginalized communities. And I just want an opportunity to tell other types of stories. Those stories are impactful and important, but so are the stories about joy, about, getting your heart broken and finding your first love, and, and friendships and relationships with parents, and, mysteries and fantasies and horror novels. There are all these things that I feel like we just haven't seen enough of. And so my hope is that in the future, we will have, hundreds of stories for every way in which we exist. It's just really important to have that kind of, those kinds of different experiences on the page. So my hope is that I can, that my work will continue to contribute to this conversation that we're having about representation. That's really the best I can hope for.
That's powerful. Thank you. So it seems that book bans are a recurring issue, and a recent influx of them seems to center around books of color and books that reflect the LGBTQ plus community. How have they impacted you?
Yeah, so I knew that when I wrote Cinderella is Dead, when I wrote This Poison Heart, that because my work centers queer Black girls, queer Black families, I knew that there would be pushback. And I have received pushback, but I think that when I heard about the book ban in Texas at the end of last year, I heard about it via Twitter. And Representative Matt Krause had compiled this list of about 800 plus books that he wanted investigated in Texas. And the vast majority of them were about, they were for and, about the LGBTQ community. They were about other marginalized communities. There was a lot of women on that list. It was just, the list was compiled just solely out of ignorance, out of homophobia, misogyny, racism. And so it's incredibly disheartening to see, my work on a list like that, but it wasn't completely unexpected. For me, I worry about the readers. I worry about the readers who will not have the opportunity to see themselves in a story that maybe will allow them to say, hey, there is a way for me to kind of navigate in this world. There are stories about people like me. That is scary for me. I think, I value my readers so much, and I want so much for them to be able to see themselves in this work, and seeing the book challenged and seeing the book actually pulled from the shelves in certain places. In San Antonio, Cinderella is Dead was pulled from school libraries. In some districts there in San Antonio, it's incredibly disheartening. But the thing I try to keep in mind is that, this kind of ignorance is, while it's incredibly harmful, it says more about the people who compile these lists than it says about me or my intentions as a writer, because I am genuinely concerned about LGBTQ youth and Black, Indigenous people of color who are looking for themselves in stories. And so the book banning for me is just another hurdle, which, I wish I didn't have to jump over it, but I will, and I will continue to, I'll continue to write stories that are for my community and the young people in my community.
That's good to hear. More strength to you.
Yeah.
So the WriteHive conference this weekend, it features a panel on fairy tale retellings. And your story, Cinderella is Dead, takes place 200 years after the death of Cinderella. So what inspired or drew you to this story?
Yeah, so excuse me. Cinderella is Dead is such, or Cinderella is just a really visible story. So I think that even if you've never seen the Disney movie or read the different versions of Cinderella, I think we all kind of just recognize that story. Um, I wanted to do a retelling of a fairy tale, but I wanted to try to approach it in a completely different way. I love musical theater, and my favorite musical is Wicked. And that story, which is based on the book Wicked by Gregory Maguire, makes me look at the Wizard of Oz. I can never watch the Wizard of Oz the same way again. I wanted to do something similar with Cinderella is Dead. I wanted to take this very well-known story and find a way into it from a completely different point of view. So in Cinderella is Dead, the Cinderella story has kind of become the backbone of this society, and young women are expected to model their lives after Cinderella. But what does that look like when the expectation is that you will, if you're a young woman, that you will find a husband and that you will kind of ride off into the sunset? What does that look like when you're queer? What does that look like when you have no interest in finding a prince? What does that look like, and how does that impact people who live outside of these boxes that society has created for us? So I wanted there to be very familiar things in this story. We recognize Cinderella, we recognize the fairy godmother, some of the magic that's happening there, but it's a totally different story. It's not just a beat for beat retelling of Cinderella. So the visibility of the story and then the opportunity to turn it into something completely different is what drew me to it.
That's awesome. Thank you. So if a reader took one thing from your books, what would you hope it to be?
I think more than anything, what I'm hoping for is that people are entertained by the story. I hope that readers think about the characters and the story long after they've finished it. I hope that my young queer readers can see themselves and understand that there is a place for them in stories like this. Ultimately, I just want my work to be in conversation with other stories about queer Black communities, and just kind of offer another option. I really want readers to feel seen and held by the work. So ultimately, I just want people to enjoy the story. It's that's why I write, to tell stories and to make people feel seen.
Awesome. What is something you wish you'd known before becoming a traditionally published author?
Oh, yeah, I think that when you love to write like I do, and you decide to write a novel and you decide to try and get published, there are a lot of other things. Writers tend to be introverts for the most part. I know I am. I was like, I'm just going to write this book and it's going to be published and that's going to be it. And that's great. No, you're going to have to go and learn to, I wish I had known how much I was going to have to kind of put myself out there, as in terms of, speaking to people. Public speaking is not something that I'm great at because I have anxiety and I have, and I'm a pretty introverted person for the most part. So, I just think that there's this whole other kind of marketing and promotion element to writing that a lot of people don't think about until you get into it. I wish someone had kind of given me a heads up about that, but it's okay. We're rolling with it, and I'm finding where my strengths are and where my weaknesses are, and I'm working with it. But yeah, having to kind of get up in front of hundreds of people and give a speech, or talk to people, answer questions on the fly, that kind of thing is, it takes practice, and it's a challenge if you're an introvert. So I wish somebody had kind of warned me about that.
That makes sense. And I'm sure
Yeah.
our viewers can relate. Absolutely. So with your writing, have you ever had to overcome feedback or notes from a reader or an editor that you didn't necessarily agree with? And what was your response?
Yeah, so I think that there is a perception that editors are kind of these uh big scary people who, they look at your manuscript and they say you need to change this and you need to fix this, and that's not really it's much more of a partnership. So if there's anything, my editor is wonderful. I have a few different editors depending on kind of what I'm working on, but my editor at Bloomsbury is amazing, and she knows me and she knows my work and my writing style, and so it's very comfortable for us to have this kind of back and forth, where if she has a question about something or a suggestion, I really am open to hearing what she has to say, and really honestly looking at the work and saying, can this be improved by this suggestion? And a lot of times the answer is yes. And so I really think it's about the kind of working relationship that you have with your editor. And if there's anything that I just am staunchly against, I can leave it. That, it ultimately is my choice to do that or not. If there are suggestions that I don't 100% agree with, I don't have to, I don't have to do that. But I do try really hard to look at my work honestly and really take the feedback from my editor, because she's incredible. Learning to accept critique, valid critique, because I think there is a difference between the kind of feedback that I get from my editor and feedback I get from readers, because that's different. By the time it gets to the reader, it's done. It is written, it's edited, it's out there. And so there's not a whole lot to be kind of taken from these kind of outside voices. I love it when readers contact me and they love the work. But there are some times where I get somebody who really doesn't like the work, and that's okay. But there's not a whole lot I can do about it at that point, if I wanted to. So, so yeah, it really is about kind of deciding who you can trust to take critique from with your work.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So between writing books, raising your family, and living your life, how do you protect your mental health?
Oh, good question. I have not always been great at that. My kind of work-life balance sometimes goes off the rails, especially when I'm, when I have multiple deadlines, or when I have said yes to too many things, which is a problem for me. I think that for me, it really is about kind of switching everything off, and setting some hard and fast rules about my my time. So trying not to answer or look at work emails on the weekends, trying really hard to engage in other things that don't have anything to do with my writing. I love spending time with my kids. I love going to the movies. I love, being out. I try really hard to engage in those other kind of fulfilling things. And it allows me, I think, to be a better writer, because I'm kind of out there experiencing and living and enjoying myself. That's what I try really hard to do. Also, therapy. Like if you have somebody that you can talk to, who that you can that can kind of help you along, I'm a huge advocate of counseling, of therapy. It has helped me tremendously because, like I said, I have anxiety, I have social anxiety. And so having someone, kind of this trained professional to kind of help me through and give me tools that I can kind of use in my everyday life has been invaluable. So I'm a huge proponent of therapy if at all possible. So yeah, a combination of those things kind of keeps me on track.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
So what advice would you give to aspiring writers who want to follow in your footsteps?
Ooh, I think the biggest piece of advice that I could give is to really to write the story that you want to tell. Kind of like I was saying earlier, I wrote 3 other novels before I wrote Cinderella is Dead, and those books, unfortunately, were me really trying to play into what I thought publishing and readers would want. Um, and to the point where it really wasn't a story that felt um it those were stories that didn't really feel like they were the story that I was supposed to be writing. It just kind of felt like I was trying to emulate other writers, other things that I had read. And so until I said to myself, okay, this isn't working, I really need to tell the story that I want to tell. What is the story that speaks to me? Um, that's when I wrote Cinderella is Dead, and that's when everything kind of clicked into place for me. So the biggest piece of advice is, to write the story that you want to tell. And after that, it is that writing, as much as you love it and as much as it kind of comes from your heart or whatever, it is a business. And so there are things that you have to kind of take into consideration there. But ultimately you just have to write the stories you want to tell, and kind of uh just be true to the story that you need to tell. That's the biggest thing for me.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
So last question, can you tell us about your upcoming releases and when we can get our hands on them?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so let me see if I can actually get the dates right, because I'm like, my brain is all over the place. So this Poison Heart came out last summer, and so on June 21st, the sequel, the it's a duology, so this is the final book. It's called This Wicked Fate. Comes out June 21st. It picks up right where we left off in This Poison Heart, and we will get to see what the fates have in store for Briseis and Marie and Briseis's family. I am extremely excited about this book. And then in September, my middle grade debut comes out. It's called The Vanquishers. It is a vampire story, and it is, let's see, it's kind of like Watchmen meets Stranger Things with a Buffy twist. It is, I love scary stories, I love vampires, so getting to write this middle grade kind of adventure has been just amazing. So that comes out in September. I am extremely excited about both of these releases. Again, queer Black girls for the win. And I'm just very excited. Yes.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And to all of our WriteHive 2022 attendees, if you have any questions for Kalynn, please definitely drop them in the chat. We'll stick around to answer them a little bit longer. To find Kalynn online, please visit her website at KalynnBayron.com or on Twitter and Instagram at Kalynn Bayron. That does it for this panel. I hope you enjoyed it. Kalynn, is there any final words you'd like to share?
No, just thank you so much for having me, and I'm just very honored to be able to be here and speak to you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. On behalf of WriteHive, thank you so much for attending. We'll see you on the Discord.